No,
Okay.
not stop podcast.
No, stop. Oh, stop.
Are you able to cancel? Okay, and thank you very much for listening to the introduction there. And I'm going to now hand over to Will.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to almost see you, and thanks very much for joining us. As Nadia said,
Will, I think you just need to click unmute there because we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Oh, it should be working. Okay, can you hear me now? Better? Great. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, great, we'll carry on. So my name's Will May. I'm Head of English at the University of Southampton, and this talk, as Nadia said, is part of the Southern Universities network, and SUN is quite a nice acronym for today, obviously. I hope you've enjoyed some of it. And the title of today's presentation is What Can I Do with an English Degree? There's probably a note of exasperation there. What can I do with an English degree? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I wanted just to start off by thinking why there might be such a confusion as to what you might do with an English degree as opposed to any other degree, as we'll be hearing in a couple of minutes. It's a degree which makes you very employable. It's a really open-ended degree. It encourages you to be creative, to be nimble, all sorts of things. Some of you might be studying English A-level or teaching English A-level, and you might be hearing that question from students who are thinking about doing it as a degree programme. Now, part of the problem or the opportunity or the challenge might be in the word itself. Of course, if you choose to do chemistry at university, you'll become a chemist. If you choose to do history at university, you'll become a historian. If you do English at university, what will you become? There is no word for it. And this might seem like just a point of grammar, but it's telling actually that because it gives you no word, no noun to describe what it is, the qualities and capacities you'll build in an English degree bring to you and bring to the world, it's a little bit harder to think about what that degree becomes. So we're going to think about that question in two ways in this afternoon seminar. First of all, we're going to think about the kinds of things that people do go on to do with an English degree, a range of things, and also about the kinds of skills they develop on their degree programme. And then we're going to wind back a little bit to think about what an English degree is like, what it might have to do or not with A-level English, to think about why it's a degree which is so valued by employers and why it's one which can allow you to spread your creative wings and make a difference in the world as well. Okay, and as Nadia said, do type in questions as we go and we'll come to them at the end, and I'll be talking for about kind of 35-40 minutes, and then there'll be a chance for questions after all that. Hopefully you can see the slides as well as part of this presentation. So the first question we might want to ask then, what can you do with an English degree? Part of that question we might answer by turning to another one. And university study is often about responding to simple questions by asking more questions. And that's one of the things that a degree will give you the opportunity to do, is to not just find kind of standard answers, but to ask better questions. Okay, so imagine that we're asking ourselves the question to be or not to be a student of English. The person you can see in front of you, hopefully, asking that question is Maxine Peake, playing Hamlet. Now, Hamlet, which I imagine most of the audience might have read or might know about, is a play about a man who is very indecisive. He's probably one of the most famous indecisive people in literature. He can't quite make up his mind what he wants to do. So I thought that might be an interesting figure for us to think about today as we think about what an English degree is for and what it helps you to do. It's also been paired, of course, with probably the 6 most famous words in the English language. To be or not to be. They're certainly the 6 most famous words in English literature. And as words, they're quite interesting as well, because they're incredibly simple words, the copula, to be, and yet that question, to be or not to be, is a very profound, difficult, human question. It's philosophical, it's rich, it's complicated. And that's something else that's really exciting about university study, the ability to think about complicated ideas and systems, but to be able to communicate them effectively, concisely, and in a way which is going to reach a wide audience. So here we are, we're at Maxine Peak, we're Hamlet, we're asking that question, to be or not to be a student of English. And actually, the question underneath that, of course, is to be or not to be a graduate of English. If we're not going to become a historian or a philosopher or a carpenter or a chemist, but we're going to become an English graduate, what exactly will that mean? Okay, well, I think the degree teaches you to be nimble, teaches you to be curious, it teaches you to be creative, teaches you to be resilient. So what kinds of things might people with those qualities go on to do in the world? Well, if I think about some English graduates that I've taught or who have been taught at the place I now work, there's a wide range of things, but often what links them together is the sense in which they're setting their own agenda in the work they're doing. So some former English graduates from my university include Jason Cowley, who's the editor of the New Statesman, which is magazine, political magazine, which has a very wide circulation and really helps shape political debate in the country. Sarah Wise, a popular historian, Caroline Wyatt, who is a former BBC defence correspondent. She's now the royal correspondent, so you will definitely see Caroline Wyatt out in force on Saturday at the royal wedding, if you're watching that one. Our former graduates include Martin Conway, TV director for The Apprentice. If I'm thinking about students I've taught much more recently and what they've gone on to do in the world, they've included Tasha Onmezi, who's journalist for The Bookseller, which is the most important magazine in the publishing industry. So gathers together all the different things going on in that particular sector, whether it's author deals, publications, prizes. Tig Wallace has done an English degree, and he's now an editor at Penguin Random House. So he's in charge of choosing titles that will be published. A recent graduate I've taught who has an English degree is Emma Joriel Davies, who's a radio presenter at Capital South Coast. So you can see already that some of these jobs clearly link to what people will be doing in an English degree, but some of them also draw on kind of capacities or abilities or muscles they might have developed while they've been doing a degree. And it's not just kind of literary or creative or kind of closely related fields that English graduates find them in. I think more than any other degree, English graduates are able to succeed in all kinds of different industries. And there's a recent report, which I'll be talking about a little bit, done by the British Academy, which looked at scores of arts and humanities graduates across the country in the UK over the last 10 to 15 years, and found some things which might surprise us. So, for example, 55% of global leaders, that is, politicians, leaders around the world, are arts and humanities graduates. 62% of 2017 general election candidates were art and humanities graduates. 58% of the FTSE 100 chief execs were arts and humanities graduates. So the sense that something about an arts and humanities degree gives you the capacity to think originally, to think creatively, and to think nimbly. You can imagine that if you're in charge of a country, if you're an MP, if you're running a very successful company, you have to make tough decisions, you have to think on your feet, you have to think differently to other people, but you have to be able to work with them as well. And I think that's something that English graduates are extremely good at. So that's a really important thing to think about. And if you're a student who's sitting there with a love of Bronte or Austen or Dickens or writing poetry or 1950s drama, you might not be thinking about doing your degree because you want to run a country or become a chief exec. But it's really interesting to think that that communion that happens with you and the text in conversation with people as you're thinking about representation in that text, how it works, how it's put together, different contexts for it, those skills you're developing, that way of seeing things differently is incredibly useful to the world around you. Okay, the ability to see things from other perspectives is something which is very easy to lose in life, and an English degree really allows you to put that centre stage, to take that with you to work, to take that with you in the world. Okay, so that's a really important quality that an English degree might give you. And actually, if we think about the world of work more locally, nationally, close to home in the UK, the big growth industries in the UK are in the creative industries. While the world and politics is very hard to predict, what we can say with some certainty is that graduates of the future are very likely to have one job or one profession, but they're likely to have all sorts of different jobs throughout their life. So it's probably useful to think about a degree which isn't just going to fit you up to do one thing, because your life is going to contain many things, many opportunities, many jobs, many options. Okay, you want something which is going to enable you to use your skills in all sorts of different ways. Now, creative industries in the UK, which might cover digital gaming, it might cover literature, it might cover all sorts of things, that employs 1 in 11 people in the country today. Okay, so 58% of skilled workers in the UK in the creative industries had an arts and humanities degree. The arts and humanities are also really important in what they bring to the country's cultural sector, which is worth 27 billion a year, so a really important industry in the UK. And arts and humanities graduates lead the way in shaping that. And what the report also found from the British Academy was that students who have had experience in an arts and humanities degree are 3 times more likely to be in a creative job than other graduates. So it's giving them the skills to be flexible, to move around, to make creative contributions to the economy. And in a world that's quite uncertain, actually what you need is people who can be creative, who can create kind of startups, new ideas, new inspirations, see things differently. Okay, so it's really broad brushstrokes. And you might be thinking about an English degree because you want to be a writer, or you want to go into publishing, or perhaps you'd like to teach English. But actually, there are all sorts of things you can do with that degree. So rather than it being a problem that you can't call yourself a philosopher or a historian, it's actually a really good opportunity as well, an opportunity to make your own path. So what exactly is it about an English degree that really sets people up for all these incredible things, to lead countries, to help create a cultural sector, to drive the creative industries? Well, I think there's a couple of things which I'll talk about in sort of slightly abstract terms, and then we'll think about the nuts and bolts of an English degree itself and how it is that those things might create them. I think the first one is an entrepreneurial spirit. Okay, so you really are going to be a graduate who thinks for themselves, who comes up with ideas, with projects, with initiatives, with schemes, with arguments. You'll be someone who can analyse things, who can work out how valid a point of view might be. Something the British Academy report discovered was that English graduates are valued for their positive attitude, their originality, their creativeness, and their openness to new ideas, their flexibility, their ability to work autonomously and motivate themselves, combined with their strong communication, collaborative and team working skills. So this is something that makes them ideal entrepreneurs. You can think about ideas yourself, follow them through, but you can also work with other people to develop them. And actually, if you're someone who can think about your own ideas and develop them, you're in a really fantastic place. Okay, you don't have to be shaped just by your environment. You can help to shape your environment. So the entrepreneurial spirit is a really important quality that an English graduate has. They tend also to be graduates who contribute something to society. Now, of course, in all sorts of ways, we all contribute things to society, but particularly arts and humanities graduates do this. So they're a highly skilled workforce. They're employed in sectors which tend to underpin society's cohesiveness, such as social work, local government, the voluntary sector. Sometimes they become researchers that produce world-leading research that underwrites social and economic health, wealth, the reputation of the UK. They tend to be active and engaged citizens. They're responsible media professionals, and they contribute to arts and culture and the well-being of the wider population. Okay, so it might seem strange to you that if you look at different degree programs, you can see English, you can see history, you can see philosophy, you can see medicine, and you think, well, probably if I want to make a contribution to society, I'd become a doctor. But actually, to make a society, we need all kinds of different skills. And what you can do with an English degree really allows you to help contribute in all sorts of ways, in a range of different ways. And range is a really important word to think about with an English degree as well. So hopefully that's given you a sense of some of the different things that an English degree would allow you to develop. I want to come back particularly to that idea of positivity. It came back again and again in the recent British Academy report that arts and humanities graduates have a positive, open outlook. They have a willingness to try different approaches. They're comfortable with uncertainty, with unfamiliarity, with anticipating and accommodating change. Now, again, we can't really tell much of what's going to happen in the world, but we can be sure that it's going to involve lots of change, lots of uncertainty, and the people who are going to be able to get through that are people who are going to be able to try all sorts of different things. Okay, so that's a kind of a range of things that employers of all sorts seem to value about English graduates. So in that first half, hopefully I've laid out some of the ways in which an English degree is incredibly useful, even though it won't give you a single noun which describes what it is you've done. In the second half of the talk, I want to think a little bit about what English is like at university and why the practice of reading books and discussing them might allow you to do all these things, allow you to develop an entrepreneurial spirit, allow you to develop a kind of resilience and openness and positivity that employers seem to value so much from the degree. So one of the things that might be useful to think about is how far English universities, like English at A-level, I know most of us listening today are either A-level students or A-level teachers. And on the face of things, it might appear that English at university is just the same as English at school level. So if you wander around university campus, you'll see people talking about books, discussing them. You might see them making kind of notes, having debates. You might think, well, this looks a bit like my A-level classroom. And actually the place I teach, the campus I teach in, actually was a former sixth form. So you really would be right in thinking it looks quite a lot like an A-level classroom. But I would say that that's quite a deceptive seeming, that actually things are very different. So hopefully before you, you can see two texts, and they look a little bit like A-level set text, possibly. You can see lots of annotations, you can see lots of notes, you can see on the left hand a poem by Emily Dickinson, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, and on the right hand you can see the first page of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. Now, I wanted to show you images of those two texts to give you a sense of what it might be to study text, what it is you're doing when you study a text. Now, both of these images come from texts that have been studied for A-level. Okay, and one of the things you might notice is that the text on the left hand, the Emily Dickinson, it's divided into themes, it's color-coded, essentially it's folding away what's a very complex strange, bizarre poem and trying to make sense of it, okay, folding it into patterns so it can be written about in prose. Similarly, Mansfield Park, it's a slightly rangier student maybe, but they made annotations and they're trying to make connections between different parts of the text. Okay, now in one sense, that's what you'll be doing at university too if you study English. You'll be reading a range of literary works, fiction, prose, poetry, drama from all around the world, from all different periods, and using the close analysis skills that you're building at A-level and applying them to a wider range of texts. But you're also doing something very different as well. So whereas A-levels are often focused on how words work in texts, so the nuts and bolts of how one line speaks to another, how one stanza speaks to a former one, what a poem is, what are its literary effects. University thinks about how texts work in the world. So let me try and put some examples on that to make it a bit more concrete. An A-level question about Sylvia Plath's poetry might say, discuss the theme of death in Sylvia Plath. At university level, it might say, how far did Ted Hughes' editing of Sylvia Plath change her final collection? It's asking you to think about the text as a live object which is transformed. An A-level question about The Great Gatsby, which is a novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is often studied at A-level, might be, discuss the American dream in The Great Gatsby, or discuss the unreliable narrator in The Great Gatsby. Whereas university version or university question for that text might be something like, how far did the end of the gold standard transform the representation of money in The Great Gatsby? So it would ask you to think about economic theory at the time, the relationship between money, capital, and text, and to trace that through the novel itself. So you're thinking much more widely about context. That's really the key thing, how contexts work. That will have an effect on how you're responding to individual texts as well. So whereas at A-level, you're organising the text into themes and techniques, at university level, you're asking questions of the text and you're using it to ask questions. So remember, we started this webinar with that question, to be or not to be a student of English. Okay, the idea of asking a very complicated thing using quite simple vocabulary, but actually asking questions and asking more questions is a really important part of university study. And that's one reason why arts and humanities graduates are so highly valued by employers. So you'll be reading a much wider range of texts as well. They won't just be fiction texts. You might be reading things that take you into the realm of philosophy or economics or history or law. It's really striking when I think about the department I teach in, that actually lots of the people I teach with didn't do their first degree in English. They might have done it in French or in law or in history and philosophy. The reason they've ended up teaching English is because it's a very porous, open subject. So English is a subject which is interested in maritime law or economics or how ideas are body and mind in philosophy and find their way into the poetry of John Donne. It allows you to bring all those things in. So it's a very kind of broad church, to use a particular metaphor. And to put it kind of rather glibly, but hopefully helpfully, an A-level approach to English does rely on the set text. So it's probably set text you'll be thinking about now if you're preparing for your A-level exams this summer. Whereas university level study is often about unsettling texts. So it's trying to think about what hasn't been said about the text before, making it a bit more unfamiliar to us, thinking about it in new and strange ways, putting it together with contexts that complicate our understanding of the world. And that is a key thing, that we are really looking outwards to think about the world here. And that's helpful to think of in terms of English as a university discipline. as well. So often you'll find if you go from campus to campus looking at universities, that English has found a lot of room for creativity as well. So sometimes you'll find creative writing is part of an English degree, or that creative writers and English literary scholars work together in delivering programs, which can be really helpful. Certainly where I teach, T.S. Eliot was a really important mentor to our first ever head of department. And so creative practice is as important as critical practice. As a discipline, it's also been very interested in theory, in ways of reading against the grain, in reading differently, particularly in the 1980s. And that sort of history of looking outside of itself has continued. So if I think about the place I teach now, there are colleagues who teach the contemporary novel and visual culture, and they might find themselves at a gallery one week studying there. It's a very kind of broad and open discipline, and quite an innovative one. It's always changing. So English degrees now are different from when I did an English degree. And if you go into an English degree and teach English, you'll find that they're always changing. So because they're very open, that's one of the exciting things about working in a department. The curriculum and the way we think about the subject is always changing as well, just as contemporary fiction is always changing its kind of trends, its ideas. And just to give you a sense of how many different things you might do in an English degree, I thought it might be helpful to look at the range of modules you might be studying. So wherever you study, if you study English, you'll find you can probably study in a range of different periods. Sometimes you might do author-specific courses, or you might do ones based on a particular genre. But thinking about some examples from our own programme at Southampton, you can see you'll be doing lots of things that will take you outside of a campus as well. So I teach a third-year course, Creative Writing in Schools, where final year students go out to teach English on a school's placement. Now, that's helpful for them if they want to go into education, of course, and lots of people with an English degree do go on to teach. And in fact, Nadia, who introduced the talk today, is a former English student who's gone on to be an English teacher. But people who aren't staying in the classroom, it teaches them lots of things too about what their subject is, about how to work in a team, how to work with a group, all those kinds of things. We have a module called Contemporary Fiction and Visual Culture, which follows writers into the gallery. Our students can write their own short stories on the course Brief Encounters. You'll also find that English at university level is much broader in its geographical scope too. So although universities vary and some are more traditional than others, generally when English literature is taught, it means Anglophone literature. That is, literature written in English rather than written in England. So you might find yourself studying issues of identity in African literature, for example. And when you come to some of the texts which you might already know, or might already have studied, or might think, yes, that's definitely what I think of when I think of literature, you might be studying them in new ways. So on a course like Victorian bestsellers, you'll be finding out how Dickens made his money, why were his books serialized, and how. Why does he write in that particular way? You can trace the history of piracy on the module Swashbucklers, Cutthroats and Revolutionaries, which allows you to see how pirates have been represented in over 500 years of English literature. So a very kind of broad sweep of things. And I think increasingly English degrees want you to think practically about what you're studying. So most of you will have either read a romantic poem or have some idea of what I might mean when I say a romantic poet. Yet it's hard to then think about what makes a poet a romantic poet. How did that term come into existence? How did it come to be? Now, one way you could think about that is to study textbooks about it, to read about it, but on a module like Poets, Books and Anthologists, our students make their own anthology of poetry from the 1790s, and then begin to get a sense of how that term romanticism came into being, how it was created, how it flourished, and the kind of context that made it happen. So sometimes taking a sort of practical approach to the subject can give you a broader understanding, not just of the words on the page, but how they've been read, how we understand them, what our assumptions are about when we're reading. And that's, I suppose, again, another useful thing that links an English degree to the world outside of it. Anything which encourages you to challenge how you normally think and to challenge your assumptions can be really useful when you go into the workplace. It's also worth saying, again, that English degrees will take you off campus as well. So if you do decide to do English at university, you won't just be in a library. So some places our students go in Southampton, they go to the Tudor House Museum, which is in the centre of town, to work on some creative fiction there. They visit Chawton House Library, which formerly belonged to Jane Austen's brother, to learn more about the Regency and the world that created Jane Austen. If they're studying experimental poetry, they'll go and take in some poetry readings at one of our cafes downtown. So there's a sense in which the world outside, off campus, is teaching you something too. Okay, so by all means, English is a great degree if you want to spend 3 years in the library, but you can also spend lots of time outside that library space too and think about the conversations those two places have with each other. So it's definitely a degree which teaches you to think outside the books, which might be a kind of strange thing to think of as you look at your bookshelf and think, I definitely want to do more of this. But it also allows you to step beyond them as well. You'll find that an English degree will be housed in a place which, of course, is full of people who love writers and writing. So either there will be creative writers perhaps teaching on the course, or there'll be lots of writers coming in to talk about their work. You can see some images there of Valjit Nagra, who came to speak recently, the poet Michael Davidson, the poet John Agar. It's also worth saying that the English degree, because it's very interdisciplinary, because it looks outwards, is actually a really good one for putting alongside other degrees too. And you've got some examples there, English and history, and of course lots of the work you will do if you did English university would be kind of thinking about the historical context of the books. So those are two degrees which go together quite well. You might look at English and music, which thinks about those two interdisciplinary art forms, what happens when a piece of text is set to music. English and film goes very well together. The reading of a text and the way you learn to read a text can also help you read a film as well. English and philosophy, there's a natural partnership there, and English and modern languages. Now, probably when you've been reading the novel, you've thought about it in its context as an English novel, perhaps as a Gothic novel, if you're studying a Gothic novel. But of course, the novel has a long European tradition, which starts with Cervantes in Spain and travels all over Europe. So it can be really useful to get a wider cultural sense of the literature you're reading and how it crosses boundaries and it crosses borders as well. So that can be a really useful way of thinking about a potential English degree. And it's worth saying as well that because English is very broad, because it allows you to study lots of different things, most universities will allow you to study English with lots of different subjects in lots of different ways. And lots of the qualities that I've talked about employers liking, the entrepreneurial spirit, the resilience, the openness, the creativity, you can really see that come through in some of the things that students do during their degree programme, whether that's taking a year abroad, a study abroad programme, perhaps a year in employment. Lots of universities now offer that, so you might do a 2 or 3 year or 4 year programme with a year in employment. You might take a minor in a different subject, if that's something you want to pursue, or an elective. You'll find that universities are getting more and more flexible. So even if you decide on English as a degree, that doesn't limit you. And because it's a very broad degree, it can be a really good one to study alongside other subjects, okay, or in other places. So you can see that all the different opportunities you might get at university all work together with a degree like English to make you into somebody who can really make your way in the world wherever you want to go. It's worth thinking a little bit too about the different kinds of ways you learn at university. So there'll be the lecture, which will be perhaps an unusual format, but is used less than it has been really, but it's a really good way of presenting ideas to discuss later on in seminars or in tutorials. and discusses the key word. So your tutor will be an academic or perhaps a writer, but there'll also be someone who's really interested in your ideas and in developing your ideas. So you'll have those conversations as equals. So you'll be discovering ideas about the text together. And everyone you ever speak to who's taught English University will tell you that every time they come back to a text with students, they discover new things in it. And I'm sure A-level teachers will tell you that about texts too. That's one of the joys about studying English, is it has all these different layers, all these different possibilities within it. And just giving a bit more detail about what an English degree might be, I just want to talk very briefly through, say, a first year of an English programme. As with to be or not to be, the first year programme where I teach English asks questions which seem like very simple questions, but actually the answers are quite complicated. So you would study in your first year 8 courses, one on the novel, the form of the novel, the history of the novel. It's a word which of course means new, but most of us think of it as being a form which has been there forever. And of course, it was invented at a particular time, at a particular moment, with a particular set of circumstances. So how was the novel invented? How did it come to be? You'll ask how you read poems in poetic language, and often an English course will give you some support in writing too. And I want to make a particular plug here for the essay as a form, not just as one you'll be probably doing quite a lot of when you get to university, but an essay as a form in itself, which is worth thinking about and which has a history. Okay, so when I say the word essay, you probably might think of the word panic or coursework or essay crisis. It's often linked to assessment, whereas actually the essay as a form is really individual. It was kind of something that developed organically at a moment where culture was very interested in what individuals thought, how individuals might test out ideas, how individuals might be curious. So it's key that an essay is at the centre of a humanities discipline and it's at the centre of an English degree, but you'll probably benefit particularly from an English degree if you don't think about essays so much as a way of testing you, but essays as a way of trying things out. So essay comes from the French verb to try, essay, and it really should be an exploration, okay, which is why it's a collaborative process. An English degree will give you a chance to discover what English language looked like before there were books. So maybe thinking back to medieval and Anglo-Saxon English. We're thinking about the language of the film. You'll normally be asked to think reflexively about what it is you're doing when you're reading a book. Now you might think, well, why do I need to think about that? But again, thinking about those commonplace assumptions, interrogating them, and realizing there are all kind of complex ideas behind the idea of a reader and an author is incredibly helpful for, again, unpicking assumptions, for changing things. In our first year, we asked students to trace one idea through many different periods. So one story, like the Odyssey, for example, through lots of different iterations, seeing how generations of writers have changed it, have reshaped it. Lots of English degrees also have a chance to work in groups as well. So we have a first year group research project where in groups of 6, students develop a particular topic with a researcher and work together on that. So again, it's sort of collaborative as well. And whether or not you choose to go to university, if you are thinking about kind of pursuing an arts degree, humanities degree, an English degree, it's really useful to think about the other people around you as collaborators, okay? So your ideas, your thoughts, your essays are going to be much better when you talk to other people, when you share your ideas. So that's a really important part of university study as well. Now, an English degree will not just give you spaces to work like libraries, it will give you spaces to play. They might be on-campus spaces, theatres, art galleries, concert halls. They might be spaces in the city where the university is, but they're a really important part of a discipline like English, which is creative, which is interested in performance, which is interested in how we read, and not just how we read text, but how we read images too. So whether or not you have been or go regularly to galleries, to concerts, to performances. I really encourage you to do that as part of an English degree. It will give you a really rich understanding of what it is that's happening when you read words on a page. And it's worth saying something too about university tutors. Now they get a bit of a bad rap in literary representation. They're often sort of seen as kind of donnish or shuffling old professors, when actually, certainly my experience of teaching in the English department is your university tutors are also in the world as well. So they're academics, they're specialists, but they might also be broadcasters or filmmakers or playwrights or theatre directors. And they'll be interested in really broad questions as well. So we tend to think about universities being about specialisation, but actually people specialise at university in order to ask really broad questions like who invented climate science, or what's the meaning of ambiguity, or what happens with the idea of the nation when literature is written at sea aboard a boat. Lots of kind of broader political questions which an English degree can help you ask. So hopefully you've got from that summary a sense that an English degree is collaborative as well. And while at its centre is the essay, that idiosyncratic, curiosity-led form on which will encourage you to develop your own ideas, you'll be developing in collaboration with other people. And that's almost one of the key reasons why an English degree leads people to being leaders, to being politicians, to being in charge of FTSE companies. They're people who are incredibly good at working with other people, but they have their own ideas, their own vision, their own way of seeing things. So we've taken ourselves back to our Maxine Peake moment now, and we're thinking about whether or not we want to do an English degree. So let's imagine we've decided already we definitely do want to do an English degree. And what kind of things might we want to think about next? Okay, if we like the openness of an English degree, the idea it can fit us for anything, that employers value it, that whether we want to be lawyers or judges or a teacher or an entrepreneur, it's something which will set us up for it. And what is the next step after this webinar? When you're thinking about different universities, one of the first things you might be drawn to is the link between your A-levels and the entry tariff. Okay, so what grade you need to get in order to get into particular places. Some really good advice there, or advice I certainly give you, is to be ambitious. Okay, it's much better to be in a place which is going to stimulate you, which is going to make you think, which is going to make you think differently. Okay, so it's not the time to be timid. If you're going to be an English graduate, you're going to be somebody who's bold and who takes risks and who thinks independently. So think about yourself as someone who wants to kind of push themselves, and be ambitious there in your choice of where you want to go. After that moment of thinking, right, I want to apply, you'll be writing a personal statement, and that's something I'm sure your teacher will talk to you about. And if there are teachers listening here, I'm sure you've seen many in your time. Now, I think the word that's interesting out of personal statement is often statement. A statement is not something that's always terribly interesting to read if you think about, I don't know, a bank statement, for example. And so while a personal statement should give us a sense of some things you've done, I think it's just as important in a personal statement to ask questions. So in the same way that Maxine Peake was asking a question, in the same way that your English modules will ask questions, that's what you might be doing. So don't just tell us about the books you've read, talk about what they've made you think, what kind of questions they've led to. Again, you don't have the answers here, but showing the capacity that you're intellectually curious and that you want to ask questions is really helpful. You've probably heard very often the advice that you should develop your reading if you're going to study English at university, and you might think, what exactly is meant by that? How do I develop my reading? There are all these different things I might do. And I suppose there are two answers. One, of course, is to follow your nose, read more books by an author you've already enjoyed, or read books by authors who are writing in the same period. Think about books they were influenced by, and then follow your nose there, or think about authors who enjoyed their work. And the other advice is almost the opposite, which is to try something new. try something unexpected, to read something you find difficult, and then think about why you find it difficult. Okay, so as you develop your literary taste and your knowledge of all these different cultures and genres, if you only teach your literary muscle to like particular things, it won't really develop as widely as it should. Okay, so if you found a 19th century novel challenging, try another 19th century novel. If you don't like contemporary poetry, have a go with one poem and really sit with it and think about it for a bit. If you've never read any early stuff, look at a medieval play, something that will really put you out of your comfort zone and encourage you to think differently. Again, one thing I'd say about the world is it's going to be full of all sorts of unfamiliar challenges and new things, and a degree should be full of new things too. So a really good way of preparing for that is to look for new things in the text you're reading and enjoying. Okay, so hopefully you've got a sense from that, both of what an English graduate might do in the world, but also how an English degree helps them do those things. It's now about 10 to 5, so there should be now some time for questions. So just see if any have come through.
Hi, Will. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. You're able to hear, great. Just to say, if I take kind of take back for a moment here, just because you're absolutely right, we have had a couple of questions and we're running slightly low now. We're running to time, but if we move on to the very, very brief evaluation, and then we'll move to questions straight afterwards, if that's okay with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to say, first of all, thank you very, very much to Will for a really interesting presentation on all about an English degree and what you can do with it, and also some detail on the actual course content as well. As I said, what we'll do first is very quickly do the evaluation questions. They're incredibly brief. They won't take long at all. Having said that, the feedback from these is vital in shaping future webinars, and also seeing what you found useful and what you might have wanted a bit more or a bit less of. So if we just do them now quickly, I'm just going to load the first poll, the evaluation poll on your screen. So you should see that coming up in just a second. Okay, and if you can just respond to that one. And you should see the second one there now. So if you can just respond to that one, please. And then the final question there. Okay, so thank you very much there to everyone who responded to those feedback questions. So that's really, really helpful for us. Okay, so we've got just over 5 minutes left, and we've run pretty well to time actually. If I have a look through the questions, we have had a couple, one or two which I've already been able to respond to. So in terms of future webinar sessions that Jennifer's asked about, so we've talked about the fact that there will be some more webinars, subject-specific webinars that will be advertised later this year. So question for Will. Will, Jonathan Davis has asked, would you recommend philosophy and English as a joint degree? Are you able to address that question?
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for the question. Yeah, that's a really good one to do, actually. I mean, I think lots of English students, when they begin their degree, are surprised by how much philosophy there is in it. So you might find yourself on a first year course reading Heidegger, or you might be reading Descartes. And actually, the more you can understand about how we've made sense of the mind and the body, and the questions about ethics that philosophy works with as well, the better. And I think particularly if you do philosophy in English, it will really help you build your critical thinking as well. So I find the philosophy and English students I teach do kind of particularly well when it comes to that final dissertation. And they're very good at asking kind of insightful and quite profound questions. Yeah, so I think that's a really good and quite popular combination. And again, philosophy is a degree which employers look upon really favourably. I mean, our English philosophy students are some really great thinkers and have gone on to do some great work both at MA and onwards. So yeah, absolutely, that's very strong. Something just to quickly say before I leave that one, Jonathan, is most universities as well, once they've read your personal statement and you've got your grades and they really like what you're doing, if you start studying and you find that one of your subjects is different from how you expected and you're enjoying one more than the other, most places will allow you to swap. So if you applied to do, say, English or just philosophy, and then you did perhaps a module in the other subject when you got there and thought, I really like this, then you will find that most places are flexible enough to allow you to change as well. So that's good. But just sort of wanted to flag that up as well. So making inquiries now is great, but you will also normally be able to change once you get somewhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Will. Hopefully that answers your question well there, Jonathan. You should be able to see at the moment Will's email address up on the screen there at the end of the PowerPoint. So we haven't had any other questions actually come through. But if there are any burning questions that kind of come to you after the webinar, do feel free, obviously, to get in contact with Will if you do have any questions. Otherwise, I think from our side, from the Sun side, we've covered all that's needed. Will, is there anything else at all you'd like to add, or have you covered all of your content?
Well, I'd just say whatever you go on to do, just really enjoy it and make the most of it. And certainly if you're going to university, you know, Tutors are always there and resources to be made use of, so don't be afraid to talk to them. Best of luck. Okay.
Again, thanks very much, Will, for running the webinar for us. That was really helpful and informative. Okay, so thank you very much to all of you for giving up some time from your evening. We really appreciate your support of the Sun webinar programme. And as I say, there will be promotion coming out shortly about future webinars that we'll be running as well. Okay, so once again, thank you very much for your time, and do feel free now to close down the software. Thank you.